really quickly, and then we're all going to kind of do introductions and also introduce the topic along the way. And then, as I said, we're going to spend most of our session having you experience some of this firsthand. So, as I said, my name is Susan Brooks, and currently I'm in the role of the Associate Dean for Experiential Learning at Drexel's Law School. And I've had this great opportunity in this role to implement some curricular kinds of innovations, one of which is a course that's dedicated that I call Communicating for Success. So I use this kind of communication frame to teach teach some relational competencies, and I think it incorporates some teaching of emotional intelligence as well. And also in this role, I've been able to influence some other courses in the curriculum, reflective courses that accompany our clinical and externship courses, experiences. So I've really begun to think more about how we bring the teaching of these competencies across the curriculum, and that's really the focus of my current work. So I'm going to pass the microphone to Bill Blatt, who's going to talk a little bit more about the topic.
Hello. I teach a course on emotional intelligence at law school at the University of Miami. It's my effort to share with students all the great insights I get from people like you. I have no prior background in areas of tax, so it's quite a challenge for me. Okay, so in teaching that course, I focus on 5 skills, which will provide something of a framework for the exercises we're going to be working with here. The first is knowing one's emotions. The second is managing your emotions. The third is motivating yourself, recognizing emotions in others, and handling relationships. There's obviously tensions among these skills. There's synergies, there's antagonisms between them, but they'll provide, I think, a framework for some of the exercises we're going to be seeing today. So for example, Marjorie will lead off with a contemplative exercise that helps us know our own emotions. And then Josh will follow up with an exercise in communication, which helps handling relationships. Mary Beth and I will present exercises helpful for managing emotions. And then Cindy will wind up by exploring the assumption that's really behind all of these skills, which is the assumption of an authentic self. And what does that look like, and how does one teach that? Something else I've learned in my course and have found helpful is to distinguish between 3 different components of an emotion, or identify these 3 components. Physiology, which is our bodily movements, bodily functions. Focus, which is an object of attention. And meaning, which is the narrative we assign to that object of attention. And any emotional state, I think, can be understood as a confluence of all 3 of these components. So, for example, a couple weeks ago I was feeling a little sad, right? There's a physiological component to that. Downward gaze, shallow breathing. There's an object of attention, my mother. I was focused on my mother. And then there was a narrative associated, because a couple weeks ago was the 2nd anniversary of her death. So there was a narrative that was one of loss. And together those things mix together to create the emotion. These 3 components then give us ways of accessing emotions, and will help us understand some of the exercises that follow. Some of these exercises emphasize emotion, physiology, some focus, some emphasize meaning. So for example, our lead-off exercise in mindfulness is more focused, moves more with physiology and focus. Our second exercise in communication, right, works more at the level of meaning. And throughout the program, the other exercises will be seeing some mix of these various ways of accessing emotion. So with that framework, you'll have a sense of kind of what you're about to be doing.
I'm Josh Rosenberg, and right now background just to tell you a little bit about how I came to be doing what I do. What Gene said before really resonated with me. I graduated law school a long time ago and realized right away, like, law is about people, psychology. By the time I started teaching law school, I was by then a clinical psychologist. And I guess it's sort of like if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, I was a practicing psychologist, and all the law students and lawyers looked like they needed a lot of therapy. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to help people become more self-aware and more self-accepting, more aware of others and have more empathy. I wanted to teach them how to communicate and self-regulate and have a more positive outlook. All of this was before the term emotional intelligence became popular, but when it became popular, I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. And I tried at first doing this through things like teaching negotiation. It was a long time ago, hardly anyone offered those courses. And teaching some empathy and some self-awareness and self-regulation through that. Then teaching some of that in mediation, some of that in client counseling. After a while, I realized, well, the basis for all of these is what we now call emotional intelligence. And each one of these courses has some cognitive stuff, some strategies and learning cognitive biases, but the main part, the communication, self-awareness, empathy part, goes through all of them. And so I asked my dean if I could teach a course in that, which I do. And I tell my students in the beginning, it's kind of like teaching weightlifting. I don't lecture very much at all. There's not a lot of substance, just like a book on weightlifting may not have a lot of substance, but it takes a lot of practice. And so my class is kind of like going to the gym and practicing it. That's it.
Hi, I'm Cindy Hancock, and I'm from Charlotte School of Law. And all our bios are in the packet, so we wanted to focus on why we're part of this panel. And I'm here to talk about what we do at Charlotte School of Law. I'm an emotional intelligence facilitator for our faculty and staff. And so you can see how I got to where I am by reading my bio, and I'll be talking to you again at the end of the program.
I'm Mary Beth Harold. I teach constitutional law at Thomas Jefferson, and I haven't been lucky too much in my career to get in class specifically on my interest, which is psychology and law. So what I've done is introduce the topics through constitutional law. And a little bit like Andy was saying this morning in the session, you can take any doctrinal course and use it as a vehicle to introduce these areas. So unlike Josh's course where the students get a lot of practice, what I hope to do is introduce them to the idea that the conflict will be resolved partly based on legal rules, but also on a host of other psychological factors. And the Supreme Court cases provide great illustration points for these. Some of the things I discuss are habits of thinking and cognitive biases. And we have areas where certain cognitive biases just pop out. For example, framing comes up a lot, and in the substantive due process area, framing how the justices frame particular issues makes a difference in the outcome. You can read the frame and know what result they're going to actually come to. And also, there's no shortage of examples of egocentric bias and selective perception in the cases, so we have a lot of examples. Sometimes I'll take some time in the class to go through and talk about the bias. I like to do that at the beginning so that they can spot it as they actually go through, and they get some of the issues and talk about framing more and about availability bias. Equal protection, I introduced them to implicit bias as well as availability bias and stereotyping. And I think it makes the topics much deeper when I do it that way. So I think it's really important to get students to start thinking, as many of people expressed already in the panels, about the way they think. And they really haven't done a lot of thinking about the way they think. And so what I want to do is introduce them to how their experience, perceptions, and beliefs are not automatically the experiences, perceptions, and beliefs of their client, of the judge, of the jurors. And so in the end, I'm hoping they take away some principles of con law, but I'm also hoping that they understand how subjective the application of the rules really are.
I'm Marjorie Silver. I teach at Touro Law Center, which is on Long Island in New York. I will walk over. Andy Curcio was saying to me, you know, you are a pioneer in this area. I said, well, I've been feeling like a grandmother in this area since I started writing and publishing about the importance of psychological mindedness and emotional competence in lawyering in the late 90s, when my first articles came out. But I so resonated with what Molly said about being a lone wolf this morning. I still feel like quite the outlier at my own law school, which I love and which is a wonderful law school, in terms of the passion I have for the importance of the intrapersonal awareness and the interpersonal skills to being good lawyers. I'm not a clinician. Well, I'm sort of a quasi-clinician. I now teach a seminar to or civil externship program once a year. But this has still been a passion. For me, it's so wonderful to spend 2 days with the choir, preaching to the choir. Not enough. It's really, I already feel so refueled. One of the wonderful things about the work I've done is I feel like it's been totally integrated in my life and my work, in terms of my teaching and my scholarship and my service to the profession, etc. I want to put in a plug for the Balance in Legal Education section, which some of you are already members of, and if you're not, please check it out, of AALS, because that's where I find so many fellow travelers and get such sustenance in terms of people who really see the importance of approaching our students and approaching the practice of law from a humanistic perspective. So I focus, when I went into law teaching was because I was a really good law student, superstar, really good at the intellectual aspects, and that's what I really care about. And over the 30 years I've been teaching, my passion has completely shifted. My allegiance has shifted because I'm most interested now in the affective aspects of teaching law, of helping my students get in touch with their core values and figure out what kind of career will make them excited to get up and go to work every day, and help them understand how much goes into the interpersonal relationships with their clients. And I introduce this into all the courses I teach, and that's primarily professional responsibility, where I teach about different kinds of affective lawyering. There's a book I edited that came out in 2007 called The Affective Assistance of Counsel Practicing Law as a Healing Profession. And I spend at least one class session having students watch interviews with lawyers involved in what many of us are now calling the integrative law movement, so they can have different visions of what it means to be a lawyer. I teach the seminar to the Civil Externship Program, as I mentioned. I use my book as a text and bring lawyers in to talk about things like collaborative divorce law. And in civil dispute resolution procedure, which is our civil procedure course, I have a heavy focus on alternative, less adversarial, less harmful ways to resolve conflict. And I don't use Facebook at all. So that I'm focusing on the stories of people who get involved in litigation, a hypothetical one and a real one, so that students understand that the way cases arise is not through a decision by an appellate court, which is what they basically get introduced to in all their other Christian courses, but it involves real people who are hurting in a multitude of ways. One of the things I have now been doing for the past couple of years, and I have to credit our current chair of the Balance and Legal Education section, Julie Sandine, who is the Assistant Dean of Student Affairs at Vanderbilt, for this. Julie also teaches professional responsibility, and it was she who had this idea, is I now start all of my classes with 2 minutes, with an invitation, 2 minutes of silent meditation. And that's what we're going to do right now. I know there are experienced meditators in the room. My guess is there's some who have dabbled, and my guess is there's some who have never done it before. But if you're comfortable doing so, put aside your electronic devices. I'm going to invite you to, do I have to focus it somewhere else other than the screen?
Maybe.
We're going to stand up and try and switch the screen when we're there.
It's on the side.
There we go. Okay. So would you please sit up straight, not rigid, with your feet squarely on the floor, and hands on your lap, comfortably. And if you feel all right about this, close your eyes. And if you're not comfortable doing that, just have a soft gaze. Just maybe midway into on your table. And what I want you to do is just, for a couple of minutes, focus on your breath. I just realized I forgot to set up my handy-dandy little app. So you can focus on your breath while I set up my handy-dandy little app here. We'll get started. That's what it's going to sound like. Okay. I want you to just breathe in and breathe out, starting now. And when a thought enters your mind, as it inevitably will, just let it pass. Acknowledge it, don't judge it, don't get attached to it. Just say, oh, that's a thought. And let it pass like a cloud does in the sky. And return your focus to your breath. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Just keep doing that. The balance of the 2 minutes. to your neighbor and just discuss what doing the exercise was like for you.
Now, when I started doing this, I was just doing it with professional responsibility. Then after Hurricane Sandy, and we were all off for a week, I introduced it to the seminar and the civil life extension. And it was only this past August that I had the courage to do it with my 85 first-year civil resolution procedure students. And after a week or so, I put up an anonymous poll for the first years. Do you want to do this every day? Do you want to do it sometimes? I'm willing to do this if it helps some people, even though it doesn't help me, and I never want to do it. And I can't say that everybody responded to the poll, but of the 30-some odd people who did, about 76% said they wanted to do it every day. And only 2 people said they never wanted to do it. Well, that was good enough for me. And in the upper level classes, I have them journal about it. And so many of them say, it's the only time in my day. Oh, when I started, it was with the graveyard shift of professional responsibility on Thursday night. You know, the late class on Thursday night after they worked all week and gone to school all week. And I thought, oh my God, how will I possibly get through this? And they were so grateful to have 2 minutes to take out and just focus on their breath. And many of them have said that they're incorporating this throughout the day. Some of them have developed regular meditation practices. And the neuroscience about this is incredible. And I have in your packet, you'll see a bunch of resources for those of you who want to either read more or watch it on technology. I've got some good YouTube videos for you. About how it increases concentration, decreases anxiety and stress. And certainly, given Lauren's presentation, even before she put that on the board, it's an antidote to the divided attention that our students and so many of us experience all the time. And it's becoming so mainstream that it isn't even kooky to suggest that law students and lawyers take advantage. Thank you.
That guy doesn't meditate. I don't meditate either. And actually in San Francisco, that's a rare thing. So the fancy about it. But what I'm going to do here is run you through a little exercise. I'm going to take a few minutes setting that exercise up and putting it in a context for you. But Susan suggested that you act as law students would. I want to change that. If you're going to act as law students would, maybe make it as first semester law students. Otherwise, just be better than law students. Empathize with us who are trying to get you to engage in the answer. So anyway, here's me. And I am a product of, I think, I won't say how much of each, but my history and my genetics. make me up. So here I am, and a lot of what I teach puts me in relationship to other people. So here I am, and somebody else in the world acts or speaks or does something, and I react to whatever they do. And the way I react is there's some stuff. Let's see if there's a point. I notice some stuff, and other stuff I don't notice. I pay attention to some things. I have feelings, and my feelings affect what I perceive and how I react to it. What I perceive and how I react to it affects my feelings, and my thoughts and wants and needs. All of these kind of go like this. And they're processed. If you have a lot of emotional intelligence, they move very slowly, but that's what they do. Anyway, then finally I act. Now, I know this is pretty obvious, but I put this here because a lot of us don't realize that the opposite is also true. There we go. That I may act, and then there's this other person with their history and genetics and things. They notice some stuff and perceive some stuff and have feelings and stuff, and all of that mixes around, and all I see is this little end product. That's it. And I point that out because often we don't realize that. We think we know a lot of what's going on in the other person, a lot more than we do. And so this is just a gentle reminder of the same thing as this, that all we really know about anything outside ourselves, this is me, or you, is what we see, what we hear, and sometimes, if we're not lucky, what we smell. But that's about it. And I want to emphasize this because we often forget that in uncomfortable situations, in difficult relationships, like even in easy relationships, we forget how little we know. We think we know the other. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Margaret O'Sullivan, who has done some work with Paul Ekman, and it said that we don't know what's going on with the other people. About 1 in 1,000 people can accurately read the emotions of other people most of the time. And 1 in 1,000 is not that many of us. About 99 in 100 think we are that 1 in 1,000. We also assume that, yes, we assume that we know what's going on inside them, and we assume that often, and this is the point before about social cognition, we assume that their values and experiences are at least somewhat similar to ours, and that's often wrong too. And that's not the ultimate problem. The ultimate problem is that this impacts our behavior. Instead of trying to understand the other, we know we already understand the other, and we try to explain them to themselves, which is not all that helpful. We may tell them what they did, or tell them their motivations, or blame them, or apply the labels we think fit them, or tell them what they should do, or how they feel, or what they know or don't know. And all of these, John Gottman has done some research suggesting that conversations that begin with any of these, accusation, criticism, or telling the other person who they are and how they feel, have about a 96% failure. Because the other person in response gets defensive and tells us how we feel, which is really stupid of them. So, the other thing is, often in relationships, not only do we think we know more about them than we know, but we think they know more about us than they know. we think that they ought to understand us and our values and how we think and how we feel. So again, it leads to the same thing. Instead of me explaining myself, focusing on myself, I'll explain them to them, and I expect them to understand me. And what that accomplishes is both alienating the other person and making sure they never understand me. I don't explain myself, I explain them. And it's kind of like in relationships where someone says, if you cared, you know what I want. When the truth is, well, if you told me, I know what I want. So, what I teach is a very simple thing to both improve self-awareness and communication, is to simply, when you're communicating, focus on what you know. Say what I know, which is what I see and hear, objective descriptions of the behaviors I see and hear and smell, and what happens inside me, my own thoughts, values, beliefs, feelings, and describe them as part of me, not as the other person, but as my experience. And so I ask people to just say what they know when communicating, and not to assume anything about the other person. They can always ask about the other person, but not to make these assumptions about them. So just limit it. You can always ask. The other half of this class, besides how to communicate and speak and self-regulate, is empathy. So it's always good to ask the other, but let's not assume that we know that. And not to, surprisingly, this is harder than it seems, because many people, when we try to describe the external events, it's really hard to do that without actually throwing in our values and judgments and labels, etc. Like, these are not actual descriptions of what I see or hear or smell. Like when you were insulting, or when you were so arrogant, or when you were so annoying, which is what my daughter tells me all the time. These are not actual descriptions of any behavior. These are all my values. These are not descriptions of any behavior we can know, because we don't know what's going on in the other person's mind, what they wanted, how they felt, what they were trying to do. Any of that. So I just, what I do is ask people, and you have this handout in your book. It's colored, green and red. And so I give this to my students, and I'm giving it to you. Well, then we already gave it to you. To do this exercise, which is, I want you to think of a difficult, not the worst in the world, but a difficult ongoing relationship, and some particular situation in that kind of difficult relationship that didn't go as well as you might have liked it to. And what I'd like you to do, we're going to start this in a minute, is there are 3 boxes in this handout you have. 2 are green, 1 is red. The 2 green ones are go. You can write in there, you can put things in there. That's where you put in what happens inside you and what you observe. The red is the interpretation of other people, which I want you to not do. I want you to not engage in that. Just go into what you know. And I'll tell you how to do this exercise in a minute. First, the reason I ask people to do it is, 1, it'll increase self-awareness if I pay attention to, oh, this is actually going on in me. It's not that they're necessarily a jerk, but if I'm thinking they're a jerk, maybe because I'm angry at them, maybe because of this. And so it helps you focus on what's going on in you, become more self-aware. It allows you to hold the possibility that our assumptions are not right. That maybe they're not a jerk, and that's why they're doing this. And if I can communicate this way, I can actually communicate without alienating. So what I'd like you to do is, and remember, I really want you to engage, take a minute or two and think of a difficult relationship, again, not the most impossible one in the world, and an instance, something that happened in that relationship didn't go that well. And then I would like you to pair up with another person and describe that relationship. And the other person can help you try to stay in the green boxes. Describe it, explaining what you know, what happens inside you, your reaction, and what you observe, and to keep out of the judgments, labels, and assumptions that you make. Keep out of the red box and put the description in the green, one or two of the green boxes. Does that make sense? And describe the situation. And yourself doing that. And take, maybe one person go at a time, and take maybe 3 or 4 minutes to describe the situation, lay it out in this model.
Okay, I think we're gonna ask people to stop here. We realize maybe we could have gone on and talked a lot longer, but we want to kind of get some feedback about this. Let me just make a comment to say we had a question. We didn't yet post this PowerPoint presentation, but we will. So those of you that are trying to get to this down, we'll share the PowerPoint. So we were gonna just see if there was a volunteer, maybe, to share kind of a scenario that you talked about and sort of how you sort of broke out your sort of the observable, the raw data, as I call it, from your interpretations. Anybody willing to, we have a microphone first that we can pass along.
And we're recording it for posterity.
Okay, great.
So you can do it anonymously if you like.
Yeah, right.
But your voice may be recognized.
I can imagine, I mean, I'm sure that you've got to have some extrovert in this room, right?
We can delete this out, I think.
Thank you, thank you.
Can I stand up? All right. Michael Gobot here at Boyd Law. This was kind of a difficult exercise, but we found it enlightening. I hope I did it correctly. So an objective description of external events. So should I go through the green box?
Okay, just kind of give us a brief, sort of, but in the, what was your sort of outside piece, and what were you aware of in terms of what was going on inside?
Okay, so externally what happened was I was getting off a plane with my girlfriend. I was carrying our carry-on bag, and we walked by the row of wheelchairs that are by the